Getting rid of sadness and worries in just a few minutes might sound impossible, but in reality, it can be done. Most of the time, we hold on to small problems and let them ruin our entire day, filling our minds with stress and making our hearts heavy. But with a simple practice and just a few minutes, you can completely shift your mood. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, close your eyes, take a deep breath in, and slowly let it out. This simple act refreshes your mind and lightens the burden of stress. Listening to your favorite music or taking a short walk can instantly change your thoughts and bring positivity back into your life. These few minutes remind you that worries are always temporary, and you are much stronger than the problems you face. The real secret lies in redirecting your mind toward positivity, which makes your heart lighter and your life brighter. So, the next time sadness surrounds you, take just a few minutes for yourself and watch how quickly stress and pain fade away, leaving you with peace, clarity, and strength. In just a few minutes, your life can change completely. The weight of sadness and endless worries often feels too heavy to carry. But what if you could set it down in no time? Imagine closing your eyes for a moment and finding yourself free from the chaos that has been holding you back. Stress, anxiety, and emotional pain don't have to control your day or define who you are. With the right focus and a few simple steps, you can break free and create a shift inside your mind and heart. All it takes is a few minutes of your time, nothing more. Think about how powerful that is. Transforming your mood, lifting your spirit, and turning hopelessness into strength without waiting for days or weeks. Life doesn't always give us control over situations, but it always gives us the power to decide how we respond. When you learn how to clear your thoughts and recharge in just minutes, you discover a secret that can change everything. So take this chance, embrace the moment, and allow yourself to feel light again. In only a few minutes, sadness and worries can disappear, leaving behind peace, energy, and a renewed sense of purpose. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock, a slow, steady rhythm that somehow made the silence feel even heavier. The curtains were half drawn, letting in just enough light to create a soft gray shade across the walls. On the edge of the bed sat a man, his shoulders hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands gripping his phone tightly. His eyes were fixed on the screen, though the messages and notifications flashing across it had blurred into nothing more than meaningless symbols. His breathing was uneven, shallow, as though the weight pressing down on his chest refused to let him fill his lungs fully. Worry carved lines into his face, and his lips were pressed together so tightly they had lost all color. In that moment, he was completely drowned in his own thoughts. Questions, doubts, and fears swirling together like a storm with no end. He thought about the bills lying unopened on the table, about the mistakes of yesterday, about the uncertainty of tomorrow. Each thought was heavier than the last, each one pulling him deeper into the quicksand of despair. It felt endless, like a cycle that would never let him breathe freely again. His mind replayed worst-case scenarios over and over, trapping him in a cage of anxiety that seemed unbreakable. His body mirrored the state of his mind, rigid, tense, and exhausted. It was as if his whole being had been reduced to nothing more than a vessel of stress and sadness. Then, in that crushing stillness, something shifted. His eyes, red and tired, slowly blinked as if remembering something forgotten. He set the phone down beside him. His hands, which moments earlier had been clenched with frustration, fell loosely onto his lap. He leaned back slightly and closed his eyes. At first, the silence became louder, almost unbearable, because without the distraction of the phone, he was alone with his storming mind. But then he remembered to breathe. Slowly, deliberately, he inhaled through his nose, letting the air fill him from the pit of his stomach to the top of his chest. For a brief second, the chaos paused. Then he exhaled, just as slowly, releasing the air and with it a fraction of the tension he had been carrying. He repeated the act, this time with more awareness. Inhaler, hold, exhale. The rhythm of his breath began to replace the rhythm of the ticking clock. His shoulders, which had been tight and stiff, began to relax and sink downward. His jaw unclenched, his forehead softened. With every breath, he was letting go, of the pressure, of the weight, of the endless stream of what-ifs. The storm in his head didn't vanish all at once, but with each exhale, it grew quieter, like waves pulling back from the shore after crashing too hard. His mind, once crowded with fear, found a moment of space. In that space, a small but clear thought emerged: this moment is enough. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, just now. That single realization began to feel like light breaking through the clouds. He opened his eyes slightly, and for the first time in hours, maybe even days, he noticed the way the curtain shifted gently with the breeze, how the light painted soft patterns across the floor, how the air around him didn't feel suffocating anymore. It was as though the world hadn't changed, but his vision had. His breathing fell into a natural rhythm now, no longer forced, no longer desperate. He leaned back, letting his body rest fully against the bed. The heaviness in his chest had lightened, not completely gone, but softened enough to let him feel human again. He reached for the phone on the bed beside him, not with panic this time, but with calm. He didn't open the flood of messages or scroll through the chaos of news feeds. Instead, he pressed the play button on his favorite playlist. The first notes of music filled the room, warm and soothing, wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. The sound blended with his breath, turning the once suffocating silence into a gentle atmosphere. His foot tapped slightly to the rhythm. His fingers drummed softly against his knee, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He realized how strange it was that only a few minutes ago, he had been drowning in thoughts that felt endless, and now, with just a few breaths and a moment of stillness, he had found a way to rise above them. The worries hadn't disappeared entirely. The bills were still on the table. The uncertainties of tomorrow still existed, but his perspective had shifted. They no longer looked like immovable mountains. They felt more like challenges he could face, one step at a time. The heaviness had been replaced with clarity, the fear with a sense of quiet strength. As the music played on and his breathing remained steady, he closed his eyes again, not out of exhaustion this time, but out of peace. A thought echoed in his mind: simple yet powerful, sadness and worry may come, but they don't have to stay. He had discovered, in those few minutes, a way to release them. The storm had passed, and what remained was calm. That moment was proof that change doesn't always require hours, days, or weeks. Sometimes all it takes is a few minutes, a few deep breaths, a pause, a reminder that peace is always within reach. He realized that the power to step out of darkness had been with him all along, waiting to be claimed. And now that he had tasted that peace, he knew he could return to it any time he needed, in just a few minutes. The evening air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth after a recent drizzle. A man walked down the narrow lane, his steps slow, his head bowed, as though each movement required more energy than he had to give. His shoulders slumped forward, weighed down by worries that clung to him like invisible chains. His face bore the tired lines of someone who had been fighting battles no one else could see. His eyes looked heavy, not from lack of sleep alone, but from carrying thoughts that refused to rest. The world around him moved in its usual rhythm. Children laughed in the distance. A street vendor called out his prices. A cyclist rang his bell as he passed by. But none of it reached him. It was as if he was trapped inside a bubble where sound and life were muffled. His feet dragged along the damp ground, leaving faint marks on the path, though he hardly noticed. Inside, his mind was running in circles, replaying worries of debt, fear of failure, and memories of mistakes he wished he could undo. The storm in his chest was louder than the world outside. After a few steps, he paused, not because he wanted to, but because his body refused to move further. He stopped under the dim glow of a streetlight, the kind of pause that wasn't planned, the kind that comes when the weight inside you becomes too much to carry forward. His gaze lifted slowly, almost reluctantly, and for the first time in days he looked upward at the night sky. Dark clouds still lingered from the rain, but between them a patch had cleared, revealing a cluster of stars shining faintly, and beyond them, the soft pale glow of the moon. Something shifted in him at that sight. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, but gentle, like a whisper. He took in the image as if he was seeing it for the first time. His breath, which had been shallow and rushed, drew in deeper this time, pulling the cool air into his lungs. He held it there for a second, feeling the stillness, then released it slowly. The exhale came with a soft shiver, as if letting go of something he had been holding for too long. He repeated the breath, this time with more intention. Inhale, pause, exhale. With each cycle, his body loosened. His shoulders sank, his chest felt lighter, and his mind, once spinning endlessly, began to quiet. The stars above seemed to widen, as though the longer he looked, the more of them appeared. He felt small in their presence, yet not in a hopeless way. Small in a comforting way, like his problems were not as infinite as he had believed. The street noises slowly faded back into his awareness. The laughter of children reached him this time, not as a distant sound, but as a reminder of life's simple joys. The vendor's voice seemed less intrusive, more human. The cyclist passing by gave a nod, and he found himself nodding back, something he hadn't done in days. It was as though the world was reminding him, you are still here, and life is still moving, and you can move with it. He stood there for a few minutes longer, breathing, watching, feeling. His lips curved into the faintest of smiles, small but real, the kind of smile that carries relief rather than joy, as if saying, I'm not okay yet, but I will be. The heaviness that had consumed him didn't vanish entirely, but it loosened enough to let him walk again. Not dragged, not forced, but step by step, lighter than before. As he moved forward down the lane, he realized something important. The worries of tomorrow were still waiting, but they no longer controlled him. All it had taken was a pause, a deep breath, and a glance at the sky. In just a few minutes, the sadness and weight had softened, leaving space for hope to return. The room was a mess, the kind of mess that mirrored the storm in her head. Clothes lay scattered across the floor, books stacked unevenly on the desk, and an untouched cup of tea sat cold on the windowsill. In the middle of this chaos sat a young woman, curled up on the corner of her bed. Her knees were pulled close to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them, as if she were trying to hold herself together. Her eyes darted from one corner of the room to another, not really seeing anything, just lost in the blur of her own restless thoughts. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, and quick, like someone who was running but hadn't moved at all. Her phone lay by her side, the screen lit up with dozens of unread messages and missed calls, but she didn't have the energy to answer any of them. The voices in her head were louder than any notification. You're failing. You can't handle this. Nobody understands. Each thought pressed down heavier than the last. She felt trapped in her own mind, like the walls of the room were closing in around her. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, but instead of opening the messages, she tapped on her music app. With a shaky finger, she pressed play on the playlist she had made long ago, the one labeled Peace. At first, the sound was faint, just a gentle rhythm flowing into the quiet room. Then it grew, soft notes weaving through the air, filling the silence that had felt so suffocating moments before. She closed her eyes. For the first few seconds, the music felt distant, like it was trying to reach her through layers of noise inside her head. But as she took a deep breath, slowly and deliberately, something began to shift. The melody touched a corner of her heart she had forgotten still existed. She let her body sink back against the bed, her arms loosening their tight grip. Her chest rose and fell in sync with the gentle beats of the song. Her mind, which had been a storm of fear and confusion, started to find a rhythm with the music. Thoughts that had been tangled and heavy began to drift, floating away with each note. She felt her heartbeat slow down, steadying itself to match the calm around her. The chaos of the room no longer looked like a reflection of her failure, but just things, objects that could be picked up, sorted, put back in place. Later, when she had the strength. For now, it was enough to just breathe. A faint smile appeared on her lips as the chorus of her favorite song played. She remembered a moment from years ago when she had danced to that very tune with her best friend, laughing until her stomach hurt. That memory felt like a spark in the darkness, reminding her that happiness wasn't gone. It was still within her, waiting to be called back. She let herself drift into that warmth, the music wrapping around her like a blanket. Her shoulders softened, her fingers stopped trembling, and for the first time that day, she felt the weight lift from her chest. Not completely, but enough to let her feel human again. Enough to remind her that sadness and worry didn't define her. They were only passing clouds, and she still had the power to clear the sky. After a few songs, she opened her eyes. The room looked the same, messy, cluttered, unfinished, but her heart felt different. The tightness that had consumed her was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and quiet strength. She reached out and picked up the cold cup of tea from the windowsill. She smiled faintly, shaking her head at herself, then placed it on the desk. It was a small action, but it felt like a victory, proof that she could move forward, one step at a time. She realized then that it hadn't taken hours or days to feel this shift. It had taken just a few minutes, a pause, a deep breath, a song. In that small span of time, her world had changed from unbearable to bearable, from restless to calm. She whispered softly to herself, as though making a promise she intended to keep. "It's okay. I can do this." He sat at the table, the harsh blue glow of his phone screen illuminating his tired face. His thumb scrolled endlessly, almost on autopilot, swiping past posts, headlines, and messages that seemed to pull him deeper into a pit of frustration. His brows were tightly furrowed, jaw clenched, and his eyes reflected nothing but exhaustion. Every scroll brought more reasons to feel upset: bad news, unpaid bills, arguments replaying in his mind. The silence of the room was broken only by the faint buzzes of notifications, each one digging deeper into his already frayed nerves. His hand trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of carrying thoughts too heavy for one person. With a sudden exhale, he tossed the phone onto the table, its screen going dark with a dull thud. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, feeling the tension radiating through his head and down his shoulders. For a long second, he just sat there, staring at nothing, lost in the chaos inside his own mind. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for the glass of water sitting nearby. He lifted it slowly, feeling the cool condensation against his fingers, and took a long, deliberate sip. The water slid down his throat, and for the first time in hours, he felt a faint calmness ripple through him. He placed the glass back onto the table and closed his eyes. His breathing was uneven at first, rushed and shallow, but then he made a conscious effort. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs, held it for a moment, and released it slowly. The first breath felt forced, the second a little easier, and by the third, he could feel his body loosening. His shoulders began to relax, his chest no longer felt so tight, and the storm in his head started to quiet, one breath at a time. The tension that had controlled his body began to slip away. His clenched fists opened, his forehead softened, and his lips, once pressed into a thin line, parted slightly as he sighed. The world hadn't changed, the problems hadn't disappeared. But in that moment, he no longer felt consumed by them. The simple act of pausing, of drinking water and breathing deeply, created space inside him that hadn't existed just minutes before. When he finally opened his eyes, the phone still lay on the table, silent and unimportant. The weight it carried no longer had the same power over him. He looked around the room and noticed the soft light filtering through the window, the gentle hum of life outside that he had been ignoring. A small, almost invisible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It wasn't a smile of joy but of relief, a recognition that peace was possible, even here, even now. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, and whispered softly to himself, "It's okay. I'm okay." The chaos hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned him. All it had taken was a glass of water, a pause, and a few deep breaths. Just a few minutes, and the grip of worry had begun to fade. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every little sound echo. On the couch sat a woman, her body slightly hunched forward, her hands covering her face. Tears slipped silently through her fingers, falling onto her lap, darkening the fabric of her dress. Her breathing was shaky, uneven, as though every inhale carried the weight of her worries and every exhale failed to release them. Around her, the room seemed dull, the light from the window casting long, heavy shadows. She felt small, almost invisible, buried under layers of sadness she couldn't explain to anyone. Behind her, tiny footsteps padded across the floor. A child, no older than 6, peeked around the doorway. His small eyes caught sight of his mother, and though he didn't understand the full weight of her pain, he understood enough. She was sad. Without saying a word, he walked closer, his little hands clutching the corner of his shirt nervously. She didn't notice him at first, lost in her own storm, until she felt a soft tug at her arm. Slowly, she pulled her hands away from her face and looked down. The child was standing there, his wide eyes filled with innocence and concern. He climbed up onto the couch without hesitation and wrapped his tiny arms around her. The hug was clumsy, small, but it carried a warmth that words could never offer. She froze for a moment, surprised, and then something inside her broke open. Not in a painful way, but in the way a heavy lock finally gives way to light. Her arms moved almost automatically, wrapping around him, pulling him close. She buried her face in his hair, the tears still flowing, but this time they felt different, lighter, softer, almost cleansing. The room no longer felt so heavy. The silence wasn't unbearable anymore. Her heartbeat, once racing with anxiety, began to settle into a calm rhythm, matching the steady breaths of the little boy pressed against her chest. She realized then that, in just a few minutes, with nothing more than a simple, innocent hug, her sadness had shifted. The worries hadn't disappeared, but their sharp edges had dulled, replaced by the warmth of connection. She kissed the top of his head and whispered softly, "Thank you." He didn't answer, just smiled and held on tighter, as if his small embrace was enough to chase away the biggest storms. And in that moment, it truly was. Just a few minutes, just a simple hug. And the weight she carried no longer felt impossible.